Hey, and welcome back to Weird and Wonderful, but this time not with an episode. This is what we're going to be doing after each one shot of our different RPG systems. We're going to talk with each other, kind of review the system, what we like, what we don't like about it, um, and what we would recommend it for, if we recommend it, and, you know, just general thoughts and feelings. Hopefully
Yeah.
to guide you on choosing the correct system for the kind of game you want to run. Um, how do you feel about kind of the overall feel when you're kind of playing the game? How did you feel about it? If that makes sense. This is less a critique of what I've done wrong or right, but more of
The
kind
general
of
stuff.
aesthetics, you could say.
I think if any of the articles on the website are any indication of what could happen, possibly.
By the way, we gotta specify. Just a second. We gotta specify that this is the official SCP wiki, which you can just look up SCP, and I'm pretty sure it's like scp.wiki. Or whatever. Um, I think it's a wiki website, but it's yeah, it's the official one. Which you can read up on other SCPs. This one is not one that's in kind of the wiki, so don't try to find it. It's not there. But there are many things that are in the same vein. Anyways, yeah,
Exactly.
continue.
I feel like the possibilities for horror are kind of endless, and it really depends on the DM what they're going to do with that because there's a bunch of. It's super pliable. Like, you could twist and contort it into anything you fucking wanted. Honestly, just go fucking gung ho. Horrify your play as much as possible. I think that's one of my favorite things about the general world of SCP.
Yeah, and I think it definitely for the system, and I think the biggest contender, and probably the one that everybody will probably be comparing it to, is going to be Call of Cthulhu. Um, since it has kind of the same vein, but I think the difference is that for the SCP one, you could do Lovecraftian horror or any other kind of horror, but for Call of Cthulhu, it's really meant, aesthetically at least, for Lovecraftian horror, hence Call of Cthulhu. I mean, it doesn't mean it's necessarily tied to it, but
Yeah, it doesn't mean it's necessarily tied entirely to Lovecraftian horror, but some kind of work off of like cosmic horror or something like that. Something horrifyingly incomprehensible. And I feel like that's why it's the possibilities for horror are way more broad. It could really be anything you want. Little fucking sludge monster who smells like peanut butter and makes people happy, or an unkillable lizard that hates everything on the planet.
yeah, it really doesn't matter. Um, and also I think a big difference is, and we never really went into this because there's going to be a later point where I kind of bring this up, which I think could be a little bit of a downfall of the system, but in the SCP, the tabletop role playing game, we're just going to call it the SCP RPG. At least I am. Um, your character does have hit points, and a lot more than something like Call of Cthulhu. We didn't really go into combat, um, but you aren't. I would say it has a little bit more of, I guess you could call it the D&D syndrome, where you can take bullets and be fine, um, and like still continue to function. And in Call of Cthulhu, you can't. Like a gun will just straight up kill your character. You're a lot more. You're I guess allowed to take more risks because your character could potentially still be fine after it, which can be a good thing or bad thing.
It can be a good thing or bad thing, but I think what sort of balance. It's not to say that it's like it's obviously it still suffers from the D&D syndrome, but I feel like weapons, especially the ones that you have access to working for the Foundation, there's the damage output is a lot higher there. Like we're talking D8s and stuff. The last time I read up,
Yeah, D8s and D10s. I mean, it's
right.
not a small amount.
It's not a
Um,
small amount, and that's not even to mention the kinds of monsters that you would be facing out there to try and contain. Like you could just straight up get like if the DM really wanted you to, you could just straight up get killed and flung into the nether realm, never to be found again.
yeah. And I think I would like to talk a little bit about some of the systems. Um, we didn't really go super a lot into dice rolling. I kind of explained how explosions worked and knowledge of skills and abilities, which are kind of like your skills in D&D, except split up across three different ones. I guess to
Yeah.
make it a little bit easier to kind of track because there are a lot. I think this is something that wasn't really emphasized in the game because there wasn't too many that I could use. I guess I could have thrown a lot of them, but there are a lot of knowledge, skills, and abilities in this game. Going down to like psychology or sign language or cooking, and there's pretty much a skill for knowledge or ability for almost everything in this game. Um, and that could be a little bit daunting, I think. And it does seem like your knowledges, which I'm just going to call it knowledges right now because I don't want to say all three of them every time, um, aren't increased by like level. You have to spend time to increase them, and they give you a flat bonus. So like if your level's like 1 or whatever, then you add a +1 to your dice roll. And within those levels, you do have decimal points, which could add more granularity, but I think it adds more granularity than's needed. I don't think you need the challenge rating to be 13.4. I think that's weird.
I feel like the decimal points are a bit excessive, to be honest with you. I feel like having like just a real clear cut, having a clear cut number like DC 14 or something like that, not 14.8 or some shit. I don't know.
Yeah, we want whole numbers, not.
Whole numbers, not.
I understand that it kind of gives the illusion of when you work on a skill, you slowly improving. That's kind of the point I think that they're kind of go with it, instead of it being like you like a big power leap like in D&D. It's more of tiny incremental steps, um, which I think could work, but I don't know if it's entirely necessary. Um, but how do you feel about the actual rolling of the dice and the different way of determining if you succeed like a challenge?
You have 8 stats um, that sort of correspond to different knowledges, skills, and abilities. I feel like it's kind of a lot of dice. So, I mean, if people are going to use this system, a recommendation I have is having that amount of dice. The amount of dice if you're like your highest stat just ready to go, because
Or just have a lot of D8s, D10s, and D12s
just
just
have a
on
lot of that,
hand.
or even use an online roller. Just get it all done in one go.
And I think that's a problem that we definitely had while playing it. Baz only had one dice, so rolling for these certain challenges took about 1 to 2 minutes because you roll a d8 and then you roll another d8, and if you roll the highest, it explodes, and you then roll more dice. There's a lot of dice there. Um,
Hold on.
and I think it's fun, like the
Oh, it's
explosion, but and it can kind of turn, it can kind of be like, well, in like D&D, if you have like a -2 to a stat, like you don't really, thank you, you don't really think like, okay, I'm going to roll anything of that because I know I'm gonna fail. There's always a chance to succeed in the system, which is nice.
it's nice. Yeah, but if you are going to use it, definitely have a lot of dice. This is perfect for fucking all those dice goblins out there. I know you exist. You can say that you don't, but you do.
You do too.
Um,
You have a lot of dice.
I have a lot of dice, whatever. I'm
Um,
trying to do better, okay?
I know, I
Um,
know. Um, so yeah, I think it's interesting. Character creation, pretty straightforward. You have appearance, body type, and reasoning, and they give you bonuses and negatives to stats. Um, Instead of it being like a racial ability, it's more of like choosing
how
um,
you look.
how you look and kind of how mentally stable you are. And what I like about it is that, which didn't come up in here, there is cognitive resistance, like for cognito hazards. Um, these things do affect like your character, and there's no right one. Like you could be nuts or naive, and both of them give you such a such a wide array of bonuses and malices that you can't really go wrong. It's really kind of the character you want to play.
Yeah, it does. I feel like it's more personable, to be honest with you. Um, I mean, we didn't get to use stuff like in the HP, like reaction defense or move
Yeah,
spears.
so we didn't really do any of the combat stuff. And I'll kind of get into the reason why a little bit later, which is actually a pretty big point that I want to make. Um, and there's a reason why I want to get to it later because it's going to take a little bit. But
To
there is a lot more stuff for combat in this than D&D. Um, I don't know how long it would take to do combat. Everybody pretty has like you do a lot of damage and you have a decent amount of health. I think with enough players and the right kind of gauging, combat probably won't take that long, but I'm not entirely certain. So, but combat is a big part of this game, I will have to admit. Um, Hello?
hey,
Hey. Um, so I just, at least I feel like it is. Like there's a lot to it that we kind of didn't get into. Um, One of my favorite parts of the system are the pseudo inspiration or
I'm not
reverence
president.
points, um, which are meant to be more are meant to be dealt out like more readily, and you can. It's meant to be less of a huge thing and more of just like a fun little bonus.
Yeah,
Um, my power just went out again.
right. I don't know.
Um, oh, here it comes back on. Oh, there it goes again. Alright, and so reference points are meant to be where you can talk to, or not, sorry, reference points are something that a DM can give out to you. There's a beeping. I'm very sorry. Because my power went out. But we have power packs. Um, are meant to be where the DM can give it out, or players as well. Like if a player really thinks you're doing a great job on like role playing or something, they can hand you a reference point and be
I
like,
feel like
"Yes, you did a good
that's
job."
that's that's really cool because we're obviously the combat in this game is pretty heavy, but having something like that where you can award each other for, like, sort of, it incentivizes more character interaction, and I feel like the character sheet itself looks like daunting, but besides the numbers and everything, it adds a bit to the game, you know?
Okay. I'm back. The power went out. We had a nice sleep. I think I kind of remember what we were talking about yesterday. About character creation, whatever. But it has been like a day, so. Um, but you were gonna say something, weren't you?
Um,
I think it was about character appearances. I think that was where we left off.
yeah, character appearances. I feel it's way more personable. I feel like I've already said this before, but it's way more personable. And by the way, if anyone would like to know a funny fact about Reagan Strano, she looks strange. Um, but yeah, I feel like there is a learning curve to character creation. But
I don't know if there's a learning curve. It's just not. It's not so much. I think a learning curve, and more of a. There's less to it overall. It's not like
yeah,
choosing your race gives you like in the new what is it 5.5? Like choosing your race gives you so many different like abilities and stuff like that. This one really doesn't, and I think that's fine. You aren't really meant to play um, supernatural things. I mean, if you were a supernatural thing, you wouldn't be playing anymore, especially in this universe, unless you like solitary confinement. You know? Yeah. Also, experience works a little bit differently. They say to give out experience via time played. Um, and I guess that's you don't spend you get experience and you don't level up per se. You spend experience to get more dice. Um, like to a stat like strength or health. You can add extra dice to it. Um, so instead of it being like again a huge power leap, it is just very small incremental steps for your character. That is definitely what seems to be the main focus is small incremental steps um, of power, I should say.
yeah, I feel like it's not. Again, like we said earlier, it's not as big of a leap as 5e. I mean, they're in completely different systems. So
Yeah. There is a system that we didn't go through, which is the merit system. Um, and it's usually meant for when you complete certain things, you get merits. And you can spend those merits to get other things. And it's really meant to be when you join an MTF, which is basically like a party in D&D. They call them the MTF units. Um, it's already a thing in SCP, but in this, it's the MTF unit. When you join an MTF unit, you have a combined merit count that you guys can spend on things. We didn't really go into that because we only have one player, but that's also something.
yeah,
Um, I think that's about it for general rule system stuff. But I kind of wanted to talk about um, how I would run this in the future and some of my ideas for how to properly execute something that is supposed to be horror. I guess it doesn't have to be horror. It could be an action kind of game. which it definitely seems to be leaning towards. I will have to admit, it seems like it's supposed to be very action orientated, um, and there's a there's a reason why I don't think horror works super well in this, and that's because of the two different ideas behind horror, which is the absence of knowledge and the absence of action. The absence of knowledge is you don't know what something is, and you don't know what it's doing. Think of any eldritch being ever in Lovecraft, or Alien and Alien. Like an, it's a being that just seems to be killing people or doing something, and we don't know what it is. And then the absence of action is not being able to do anything against it. Which again, going back to Alien, um, the Ridley couldn't do anything against the alien, right? She couldn't act against it. Doing so would literally kill her. Or in any horror film ever, when the characters are like, "Oh God, what do we do? It's an unstoppable force," or whatever. That's absence of action. Now, with the SCP game, I think having such a huge focus on combat, I think removes the absence of action from horror. And I should specify that you can have horror with only absence of knowledge. But for newer DMs or DMs that are not super familiar with how to run horror settings, such as um, it definitely don't think it's going to add. It will make it harder for people to be scared or anxious or anything like that. Um, which is why I kind of nixed it from this game because it wouldn't be horror if you could just shoot it. You know?
Yeah.
And I think you definitely could do it, but I'm not super um, knowledgeable on the subject, so that's why I just went with having the absence of both, which adds a lot of horror. Um, so I guess that is some advice I would say for maybe people that want to do something of the SCP variety, is that I definitely think that in SCP lore, most of them are, of course, absence of knowledge. You don't know what these things are, but also a lot of, excuse me, also a lot of them have an absence of action. Like some of them are like just concrete. You don't really know, you can't like shoot them, you know. Um, and so that's why in another game, which I had planned that was going to be using the same system, I did kind of remove the absence of action and could use the combat system, but in kind of a different way. And that was with the equipment system that I kind of built. And you can kind of do it however you want, but the whole entire point was to research the entity you're trying to like basically subdue, and then you can call in supplies to see if, let's say, it moves really fast. You call in like those globs or whatever that like can cement it in place or something. And so you kind of build from lack of action to having a lot of action. Um, and you could kind of incorporate that combat system, but I don't know. How do you feel about having a combat system in a horror type game though?
If it honestly, it depends on the kind of it really like you said earlier, it really depends on the kind of horror. Like if it's like a slasher or something like that, then yeah, having a combat system would make sense. But if it's a fucking eldritch horror from a different like universe, trying to understand and contain it is probably the better bet. You can't fight something intangible. And I feel like that's a lot of the entities in SCP are just intangible beings. It doesn't make sense to like, oh hey, I'm gonna walk up to this thing and shoot it with a fucking Glock. No, it doesn't. It does, at least to me, it doesn't make sense to have a combat system, or at least have a combat system that's like
It
depending on the SCP.
it feels very ingrained. Like um a lot of the stuff you get like for leveling up is for combat. Um like you get a lot like melee damage and exertion and all that kind of stuff. And there are a lot of pages in the book that are dedicated to weapons. Like probably a lot more pages than even D&D. Um, like there is a pretty big emphasis on combat. Um, and I don't know if it super works for SCP kind of stuff. I think it's fine. I don't think there's like any real reason why you couldn't have combat. Just for somebody that probably doesn't know how to do horror, it will very much take away a lot of what makes horror terrifying by having combat. And yeah, I don't know. I, I don't get me wrong. I like the system. I think it's very interesting. I just um I don't know if it works super well with a lot of SCPs. Like, why would you put so much work into having a combat system and a pretty in-depth one? I will have to admit, like they put a lot of work, like a lot of good work into the combat system. But when you go up against something that can't get killed with bullets, and uh, or at least shouldn't be, at least in lore, because in in the in the book they do have a lot of SCPs that are like um they do have a lot of SCPs from the game. Like they have, let's see here, what's one, 939, the dogs that like speak or whatever. Um, and it has all of this stuff for damage, and it has HP. True, it's 175, but again, why have, or here's another thing which doesn't make sense. And this is something that I guess they're again trying to add a combat system to something that probably shouldn't have a combat system, because 682, the hard to destroy reptile, has 750 HP. That doesn't mean it's, in lore you can't kill it.
It adapts to anything basically. There's at that point, there's really no point. If you can't, putting HP on something that can't be killed doesn't make sense. I hate to say it, it just doesn't.
Um, it does say like it regenerates HP and stuff, but why have it have HP? It doesn't make sense to me. Or
It's like
even 106, right? It has HP. Well, why do these have HP? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Uh, again, it's not like it's not like it's a bad idea to have combat, but I don't know if it works in the system. And I guess I'm sorry for harping on the combat system a lot, but there is a huge emphasis on it, and I think having that much emphasis is a little bit weird. If I were to talk about a different RPG system, a more well known one like Call of Cthulhu, um, you can't fight anything. I mean, your HP is very low. A gun will pretty much kill you if you get if even if you get if you get extremely lucky, maybe it won't, depending on the gun. Um, like you don't want to get hit. You don't want to fight against anything because everything is dangerous. In this game, there's everything can hurt you, but you have the D&D effect of a lot of HP, and I feel like not having something be like a more dangerous threat feels, I don't know, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Um, but how else do you feel?
Um, I feel like whether you want it to be a combat heavy game or not really just depends on the DM. It's, I mean, all stories are different, of course, but I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't run it. I wouldn't run it heavily with the combat system. I think I think SCP is a lot more of a lore based game. It's not. I don't see it playing out with combat very well.
No, I definitely feel like it's a discover and hence the secure, contain, protect. I mean, they could kill a lot of things in the SCP Foundation, right? It's not like they can't, but the whole entire point is trying to learn from it.
Yeah,
And by having it to where one of the main methods of dispatchal is just killing it, kind of I feel like goes against the whole entire seeking knowledge of the SCP Foundation. But I don't know. Um, Other than that, to kind of like go away from the combat system a little bit, um, because I don't want to like harp on it super a lot. Um, but I think it's a pretty, it might be daunting of a system to kind of like surmise this. I think it could be, I definitely think it could seem like a daunting system, but it's pretty easy once you kind of like get the dice mechanics down. That's about it. And maybe some of the combat. But it's not that hard. And I think that's definitely to its benefit. I don't like number crunching games. Um, there are a lot of number crunching games, like especially old games like Star Frontiers and stuff like that. And I think they do a
yeah,
good job of a new player experience. It might seem daunting, but realistically, character creation does not take very long, not nearly as long as D&D, and um, and I think subsequent characters that you may have to create will only go by faster. Um, so the character creation pretty easy. I think it's pretty new player friendly. Um, e- Especially if they don't even know D&D, I think it might be even more friendly for that because you don't have that preconception of using D20s.
yeah.
Um, but um, I think DMing it is pretty pretty easy too. Um, I just set challenge ratings. I never really have to. I never really rolled. A lot of the times, also because there, I feel like it would probably maybe get pretty intense on the DM's part if you were trying to make a lot of characters that had skills and stuff like that. It wasn't this just nebulous character. Like they had a character sheet. I know some DMs like having character sheets for their characters. And
Yeah.
I think then it could probably maybe get a little bit overwhelming because there is a lot to think about when you're making that many characters. Um, so maybe just kind of as a more nebulous concept, but um, and I don't they don't I don't think this could be false. I don't think they just have um no they do okay no they do have just stats for like regular characters in here. Um, so yeah, they do have character kind of pre-built NPCs in the back of the book, but I don't know. You could use those, but it's up to you. They don't really have any skills or knowledges or anything. It just seems to be blank. Um, like their perception is what they roll instead of adding anything to it. Which is I think actually could work better, less to kind of worry about.
Yeah.
Um, other than that, what are your final thoughts?
I think. I mean, yeah, it's a bit of a different system, but every TTRPG system is different. I think that character creation. I mean, once you like read over, like you read over the steps and you like get your dice bought, it gets a lot easier. I'm not too big of a fan of the combat system, but that's not the point of the game, and it really also depends on the DM. But yeah, I think it's a pretty solid system, all things considered.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I didn't really do too much of the character creation side. I did more of the DMing side, of course. Um, and I think it is a pretty solid system. Um, and it has a lot of granularity, like a lot of granularity. And if you like a lot of granularity, this is definitely for you. Um, there's no one stat for a lot of things. Um, and I know that's like some DMs' bane. It's like I roll intelligence to do a whole bunch of stuff. There's not really a set, I guess. I mean, I guess there is kind of the skills, but you can. Uh, I think it's just more. Again, it's just a lot of granularity, and um, running it was pretty easy. Wasn't really any dice rolling on the DM's part. Um, I don't think they emphasize the dice rolling either. Um, on the DM's part, I don't think I rolled a single dice that entire game. I just had challenge ratings that you had to overcome. And I
Yeah,
think that's good because again, dice rolling, if you don't have enough dice, can take a while. But um, yeah, all in all, pretty good system. Um, I think it adds a unique atmosphere and like idea. I think that's the biggest thing. If you like SCP stuff, you'll like this. I think it is very much geared towards people that already kind of have knowledge in SCP stuff, and maybe you could get friends or family to do it, and it might even be more fun to have them not know what's going on. Um, but for the DM at least, I think you pretty much need to have a foundational don't even foundational level of the lore and how the SCP kind of wiki works, and really just understand that. Otherwise, in this, it doesn't really super go over kind of the basics. I think it definitely heavily implies that you know a pretty good amount of SCP lore, which again, great for people that like SCP, but can be a little bit, I could imagine,
Wrong.
weird to read if you don't. There's a lot of stuff in there that I feel like if you didn't know what it was, you'd probably just your eyes would glaze over. Um, but oh no, if you like it, like SCP, I think it's a fun thing. And the
Yeah.
DM, I think, definitely needs to know SCP to really get the most out of this RPG system. It's like if you were to play Star Trek, the Star Trek board game, or that tabletop game, or even the Doctor Who one. If you didn't know who Doctor Who was or Star Trek, you're not gonna really understand what's going on. Um, for the book, though, for anybody that does seem interested in the book and would like to get it, it is on Drive-Thru RPG. Probably one of my favorite places to get RPG books. This is not sponsored. There are other places you can get it, but I trust Drive-Thru RPG. And you can get either the PDF, soft cover, hardcover, different kinds of color options. It's pretty great. Um, Again, not sponsored, but also hit me up. Um, um, or I think the publisher, 26 Letter Publishing, I think you can get it off of their website as well. But I'm pretty sure if you just search up SCP, the tabletop role-playing game, there's probably many places you could get it. I think maybe even Amazon might have it, but support local, smaller businesses like Drive-Thru. Um, and I think that's it. Next one shot though, and this is going to be should be actually the second week of October. Um, we are going to be doing a modern Prometheus, um, which is going to be different. Again, I don't think it's going to be nearly as long, but we'll see. And yeah, I guess I'll see everybody then.